Hello, just a minute here. I've just got to get myself organized. All right. My name is Diana Larsen, and I'm the Assistant Director for Collections Management, Exhibition Design, and Curatorial Affairs here at the McMullen Museum. Welcome to the virtual McMullen and to our Into the Collection series, which usually takes place live in the museum. This is our 5th virtual presentation, and we are happy to have you join us. We sincerely hope that it will be possible to hold the next Into the Collection event in the physical museum, where attendees can interact in person with live objects. Today, we will look specifically at the museum's collection of Irish country furniture and some ceramics. In 2012, I co-curated and designed an exhibition entitled Rural Ireland, the Inside Story, in which we featured paintings of Irish rural interiors. To complement the display, I sourced various objects, both here and in Ireland. These included furniture, hearth accoutrements, ceramics, holy pictures, musical instruments, and home industry items to display alongside the works of art and then to keep for the museum's permanent collection. The McMullen Museum's current exhibition, featuring British photographer Martin Parr, includes a large body of work that he did in Ireland during the period of 1979 to 2019. Parr documents a time of radical change to the formerly rural, predominantly Catholic country to a 21st century secular and global economy. Amongst these photos, he shows how traditional vernacular homes or cottages, often lacking electricity and indoor plumbing, were replaced with modern American-style bungalows with all the latest conveniences, a phenomenon known as bungalow bliss. Our focus today is mostly on the traditional furnishings from the rural cottage interiors, which have more or less disappeared in Ireland to be replaced by modern aesthetics and conveniences. I will give a little general background about Irish cottage interiors before modernization and present 2 iconic pieces of furniture that held pride of place, recounting a little bit about the challenging search for them. 3 of the museum's 2022 student ambassadors who work at the museum during the semester in various capacities will follow with their own selections. We are fortunate to have Peyton Wilson, Javaria Munnerlin, and Chris Rizzo of the Collections Committee to speak with you about the objects they have chosen to present. In 1973, Ireland joined the European Union, and profound changes to life there began to take place, bringing unprecedented prosperity to Irish farmers. Now able to improve their standard of living, they replaced their old things, the furniture that represented hardship and poverty. These country people eagerly chose instead to enter a modern world of industrially produced goods that their American relatives had long been enjoying. The rejection of traditional artifacts accompanying a new rural prosperity brought irrevocable change to the Irish countryside. Dating from the 1960s through the present, accounts from rural areas all over the Republic and Northern Ireland testify to a dramatic loss of Irish vernacular buildings and consequently of their contents. Statistics from a survey done in Northern Ireland in 2003 reflect the general situation for the whole island. 49% of traditional rural homes have vanished altogether, 39% being substantially altered, leaving only 12% intact. These numbers may have changed since then. A lack of trained craftspeople to practice traditional crafts like lime washing and thatching using locally available materials has also contributed to these losses. Many of the objects we collected for our 2012 exhibition were written off in light of the changes occurring in the last half of the 20th century. Some remote areas did not have electricity until as late as the 1970s, but when modernization arrived, the effect was life-altering. The improvement of roads, allowing travel to areas previously inaccessible, meant that the outside world could reach a formerly isolated people. With the introduction of new cooking ranges, the old iron crane and hooks at the hearth were left unused over the hearth or removed altogether. The built-in dressers were abandoned as old cabins were renovated or repurposed, often as outbuildings for animals, as new bungalows were built. Factory-made upholstered chairs and beds replaced the uncomfortable but functional settle beds and wooden seating of the past. The cooperative creameries of the early 20th century assured that the butter churn was relegated to the barn, along with the spinning wheel. Traditional crafts like basket making, spinning, and plaiting straw were abandoned with the advent of new factory-made containers and clothing onto the market. In fact, Javaria will be speaking about some of these disappearing crafts. Negative association with hardship and poverty meant that rural dwellers were more than keen to embrace the new ways, eagerly shedding a now devalued heritage. In a 2004 publication entitled The Disappearing Irish Cottage, a case study of North Donegal, the authors criticized the failure of local planners. Quote, "Large numbers of these former jewels of the Irish countryside are disappearing yearly, so that few now exist even as ruins. Sadly, in some cases, the misguided planning policies of local authorities and the past lack of any conservation provisions have hastened their demise, particularly with the controversial advent of bungalow bliss and one-off building in the Irish countryside," unquote. In reaction to these changes, some recognized the importance of saving the island's disappearing heritage, forming museums to house collections of vernacular furniture. The first of these, seen here in its beautiful setting, was the Folk Village Museum at Glencolmkill in County Donegal, founded by Father James McDyer in 1967. Seeing his community's rapid transformation, he acted to preserve what was being abandoned. Within the decade, in 1974, Northern Ireland established Belfast's Ulster Folk and Transport Museum. Clive Nunn and others formed the Irish Country Furniture Society in 1978, beginning to collect items that became the core of the folklife displays at the Irish Agricultural Museum at Johnstown Castle, County Wexford. More recently, in 2001, not so recent now, the National Museum of Ireland established the Country Life Museum in Castlebar, County Mayo. A successful museum exhibition engages its visitors by telling stories. In curating rural Ireland, the inside story, we determined to include Irish vernacular objects alongside the paintings of rural interiors to encourage viewers to make their own narrative associations between what was represented in the paintings and the actual things on display. Once we had identified the paintings we sought, I looked carefully at each image and made a preliminary list of objects to construct a wish list. The most critical items on that list were the dresser, which you can see on the left, to be filled with ceramics, and the settle bed, a bench by day and a fold-out bed by night, found in so many rural Irish homes. I will recount a little of the story of my often difficult, sometimes frustrating search for these two major pieces of Irish vernacular furniture and the ceramics that fill the dresser. I began by contacting local Irish American institutions to see if I could locate any objects nearby, without success. I learned quickly that most of the available dressers were either stripped of their original paint or refinished and spruced up to appeal to American collectors. And settle beds were virtually impossible to find in the United States. One authority touts the value of unstripped furniture. Quote, "A building or an object that has survived from a past era is a survivor from another world. It impresses us because it makes that world tangible. And if it looks old, if it bears visible signs of having passed through time, it impresses still more." My failure to find furniture in the paint led me to Ireland and a visit with Claudia Kinmonth, shown here, the world authority on Irish country furniture and paintings of Irish rural interiors. At her home in County Cork, I received a crash course on paint layers, fascia boards, settle hooks, and sponsware shards. A trip to the Bunratty Folk Park near Shannon Airport to see some furnished rural cottages reinforced my sense of for the essentials. That's my cousin there on the right who went with me. Finally, I visited 2 dealers near Galway who provided both our dresser and settle bed. A fortunate discovery on the internet led me to the late Clive Nunn, a former antique dealer and later furniture maker and collector in County Kilkenny. He maintained that the convergence of such new prosperity among the rural Irish, resulting from Ireland's new connection with the EU, and with the international vogue for stripping pine furniture, quote, sounded the death knell for much of Ireland's vernacular heritage. Nunn's photos from the 1970s reveal piles of discarded settle tables and blanket chests, ready for their caustic soda stripping bath. The original painted dressers and settles that do survive are often in a sorry state, evidenced by this photo taken at Honan's Antiques, where I purchased our dresser. Such discarded furnishings from neglected or abandoned homes were often picked up by travelers in the 1970s and sold to dealers like Nunn. The active market for light pine country furniture continues today as dealers strip the paint off virtually everything they come across, selling most of the pieces in England, France, and the United States, and leaving little of authentic painted furniture available even in Ireland. Nunn vividly conveyed how rapidly such artifacts were discovered and disposed of on the marketplace. Quote, in the 1970s and 1980s, Ireland was literally scoured, principally by Irish travelers, for this material, and it was then sold to visiting dealers and on into markets in the UK, Europe, and North America, hungry for the then fashionable stripped pine. Sadly, the origin or historical significance of these items was of little concern to the bulk of the end purchasers abroad. It was simply a question of, if it's blonde, it's beautiful. Irish tinkers or travelers helped to disperse the rejected furniture from modernizing houses. Often traveling as families before the advent of the automobile, tinkers, as they were known, traditionally disseminated objects such as imported ceramics, referred to as delf, to the rural population. In her book, Tinkers and Travelers, Sharon Gmelch introduces James Brown, an Irish traveler, who explains his people's economic survival through selling vernacular goods. And I quote, a tinker was a man years ago who thought of 100 ways of surviving. If he was selling delf and the delf failed him, he'd switch to something else. He'd sell something else, and or he'd buy something else and resell it. There was always 100 ways out. This was the real tinker, not just the tinsmith. He was a better survivor than the rest. In her book, Irish Country Furniture, Claudia Kinmonth describes the Irish dresser. Whether crude and primitive or elaborate and sophisticated in execution and design, these Irish pieces were produced by anonymous country craftsmen to fulfill the needs of a section of the peasantry whose previous history had been one of acute privation and the absolute want of material possessions, unquote. Tenant farmers or strong farmers became prosperous in post-famine Ireland and furnished their dwellings to reflect a new confidence and social status. By the end of the 19th century, the dresser had become the most important item of domestic furniture in rural homes throughout Ireland. In his Old Woman of the Roads, the poet Padraig Colum describes, quote, a dresser filled with shining delf, speckled and white and blue and brown, unquote, as an iconic symbol of domestic security. The Irish dresser, with its origins in 18th century England, is distinguished from its Welsh and English counterparts because it was traditionally made in one piece rather than two. Dressers varied according to region and the skills of makers, who most often came from other trades, such as wheelwrights or boat builders. Owing to a dearth of forests in Ireland, these makers often creatively used a variety of differently sourced timber for a single piece of furniture. For example, driftwood, boards retrieved from shipwrecks, or wood culled from nearby hedgerows, which was then unified aesthetically with paint, which also protected against the pervasive damp of rural dwellings. Paint was reapplied as often as twice a year, generally for special religious holidays like Easter, or perhaps for a station, the visit of a local priest to conduct mass and hear confessions in chosen rural homes. This domestic practice, as described in Eric Cross's 1942 comedic book about country life, The Tailor and Anstey, quote, "Twice a year, the settle and the dresser and the doors and the shutters for the windows are painted by Anstey, until by now the accumulation of paint must be near to half an inch thick. Claudia advised me to specifically look for a buttery appearance of paint layers when searching for our dresser and settle bed." The dresser, with its full displays of ceramic wares, or delf, was an aesthetic focal point, placed against the wall, beside or facing the fire or the main door. It was a functional storage unit for kitchenware and utensils, and in poorer dwellings, sometimes served as a room divider. The carpenter generally focused more attention to ornament it than other items, often with carving or fretwork, and it housed a range of ceramic wares which had special meaning. By the 19th century, blue and white transfer printed ware became popular and mass produced. You can see it, the large platter on the right-hand slide, the blue and white platter. As well as colorful hand-painted whiteware known as spongeware, where cut sponges were used to apply stencil patterns in various glaze colors to the plain surfaces. Both of these types of ceramics were sold at local markets and shops, and travelers peddled them from door to door throughout the poorer and more remote districts. The filled dresser provided a talking point, a most cherished possession, and a link to past generations. Having a well-plenished dresser was a sign of prosperity. Dressers often had stepped cornices, like the one shown here on the right, with an elaborate crown board across the top, often pierced with a fretwork pattern, also seen here. The base was usually not as decorated as the top half, and often had paneled doors and sometimes drawers, shown on the left dresser. The dresser on the right from Bunratty Folk Park is known as a fiddle front, with its curvilinear openings, which provided storage space for milking and cooking vessels. Another type of dresser incorporated a chicken coop, seen in the two examples here, one at Bunratty and one at a Massachusetts dealer's shop. Note that that is stripped. This allowed farmers to keep their hens inside during the winter months so that they had a continuous supply of eggs. Javaria will be discussing our plated straw hen coop, which served a similar purpose. Dressers were often painted, sometimes brightly, but more frequently in imitation of mahogany. This is the very full dresser of the County Galway antique dealers who invited us in for tea in their kitchen, and shows a 21st century approach to filling the shelves. The plain elegance of English and Scottish influence prevailed in the northeastern counties, where dressers remained rather severe in style, without fanciful decorations. Southern areas showed more exuberance in their color choices and decorative elements. Sometimes dressers were made with replaceable sledge feet, which protruded in front, as seen in this example, lending stability on uneven beaten earth floors or flagged floors. The removable foot could be easily replaced without affecting the main frame of the dresser. This dresser incorporates a contrasting color for the interior backboard and another for the paneling of its drawers. It was in fact my original choice for our 2012 exhibition, intended to match the red settle bed I had found. But unfortunately, a shop assistant accidentally sold it while the owners were away, and I did not get it for the collection. The austere painted dresser I eventually located for rural Ireland, the inside story in County Galway, has its fascia board pierced with crosses, suggesting a Catholic Southern origin. In fact, County Tipperary. In order to fill the dresser shelves, I searched for the most common blue and white willow pattern transferware platters and other pieces, as well as even less expensive hand-printed spongeware, plates, mugs, and characteristic bowls. The bowls, known as basins, were used for both eating and drinking. Because of their large size, they were often displayed upside down in stacks. Let me go back. In stacks on the lower shelves of the dresser to keep out the dust and also to show their patterns. This practice was known as wammeling. These wares, imported from England, although some spongeware was produced at Arklow in County Wicklow, were found at local markets and fairs, but also distributed by tinkers to more remote areas. Archaeological finds from excavated farmhouses indicate that these wares were widely disseminated and used throughout the Irish countryside, even by poorer farmers. So valued were ceramic pieces by rural families that even if they were broken or chipped, they were displayed on the dresser, turned to hide the damage, or carefully repaired. I endeavored to include chipped or broken pieces in our dresser display. And you can see the platter in the center at the top has a nice crack through it and a big staple holding it together. Fireside seating for several people formed part of the traditional furnishings of rural homes in Ireland. First, these seats were made from materials other than wood, for example, turf from the bogs, which was also cut into thick bricks for fuel, and stone. The forerunner to the settle is the four-legged backless seat for two or more people, which could be moved close to the warmth of the fire. By contrast, the settle has arms and sometimes converted into either a table or a bed, as we will see. The convertible settle bed was an essential piece of furniture in the rural Irish dwelling, a bench by day and fold-out bed by night, with space inside the folded seat to store bedding and a high back to protect daytime sitters and nighttime sleepers from drafts and the cold of the damp walls of the cottages. It was most often placed against the back wall near the hearth, providing a clear view of the front door. Made of wood with a paneled back surmounted by a cornice, the settle bed is a uniquely Irish form, although it may have origins in 17th century England. The form also made its way to French Canada to become what is known as the bon lit, adopted from Irish immigrants. By the middle of the 19th century, they were found in farmhouses throughout many parts of Ireland and predominantly made of pine. This painting of a strong farmer's dwelling inspired my search for a settle bed for our collection. And I found this distinctive red settle bed at a County Galway antique shop and originally wanted to purchase the red dresser to go along with it. In general, painted items in cottage interiors matched each other in color. Settle beds were always painted, scumbled or grained with their paneling or molding picked out often in contrasting colors. Ours is likely a northern settle bed because of the plainness of the panels. Southern examples often have differently shaped decorative panels like diamonds. By the 20th century, the form was ubiquitous in both large and small dwellings throughout Ireland. And in the latter, settle beds were constructed in kitchens because they were too massive and unwieldy to transport. The box-like bench had two strong hooks made by local blacksmiths to convert the settle into a bed. I just wanted you to note the green color underneath the red paint on the museum settle bed, just showing that effect of layers and layers of paint. The settle was then converted into a bed, and the seat hinged at the base, swung out and down to form a box bed running the length of it. Surviving big house inventories suggest that settle beds were used for servants, and in larger farmhouses, seasonal workers slept in them. In poorer homes, owners themselves slept there, sometimes several family members in one bed, while temporary farmhands were relegated to the loft or to the barn. Also, traveling craftsmen or journeymen were often accommodated in the settle bed. According to one County Donegal account, quote, "The settle bed was a great place for a drunken man because he couldn't roll out," unquote. Likewise, it was a safe place for children to sleep for the same reason, and could even serve as a playpen for toddlers. 19th century Ireland found many homeless wanderers seeking shelter at night in lonely cottages and farms. Any stranger on the dark road was made welcome at the fireside, and they were accommodated in the settle bed. I will end by showing our red settle bed in our 2012 display with the painting that inspired me to collect it. Now it's time to turn over to Peyton, who will speak about more seating furniture. Thank you. And now I have to get out. And how do I stop sharing? Stop share. Okay.
Awesome. So hi, as Diana mentioned, my name is Peyton Wilson. I'm a senior studying art history, and I'm also the chair of our collections management committee. So I'd just like to start my portion of the presentation by expressing my gratitude to everyone in attendance, and to the collections serve as a really great opportunity for our committee members and student ambassadors to learn a little bit more about objects in our permanent collection. And then the research conducted in preparation for the event is really important in bolstering our database. So from all of us in collections management, thank you so much for coming. Diana gave a really great introduction to Irish decorative arts, and specifically furniture. I'll be presenting a closer look at two of the chairs in our permanent collection that Diana brought back from her travels in Ireland. And that consists of a Sugan chair and a Hedge chair. And they're both really innovative examples of craftsmanship during a time of national poverty and environmental crises relating to industrialization and the Great Famine. So Sugan is the Gaelic word for straw. So these chairs were found in most traditional Irish homes, especially in rural parts of the country where they could be produced by local craftsmen and tenant farmers, as you can see on the painting on your screen. So this painting is an example of a work that was hanging in the Rural Ireland show discussed earlier by Diana. And it sheds a lot of light on not only the construction process, but also how these chairs functioned as everyday items in rural Irish homes. So the qualities of a Sugan chair are quite straightforward. The seat is made from plaited straw rope, and the wood is held together not by nails, but rather a framework of mortise and tenon joints. Sugan chairs come in all shapes and sizes, as their woven seats could reflect a lot of different weaves based on local styles, as well as the availability of resources. So for example, higher end Sugan chairs would be constructed from oak, which is harder to find and a little bit more expensive, whereas a more economical chair would be constructed of whatever wood could be found on the property of the craftsman or the tenant farmer that would be constructing the chair. So many paintings, such as a detail of the painting on the right, that depict Sugan chairs tell us that the head of the family, who acted as a storyteller, would be presented with a chair and a big bottle of porter to entertain the family. And so they would tell oral histories or folklore, or they would sing traditional ballads near the fireplace. And so Sugan chairs also acted as tangible indicators of familial relations and ties. Many primary sources also indicate that as a family grew, a Sugan chair would be made in honor of the newest addition to the family. So they were really durable, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. And so individuals would be able to use a single Sugan chair for the duration of their life. The McMullen is really lucky to have one of the more ornate Sugan chairs. So the one on the left is the one that we're lucky enough to have at the McMullen. It has a checkered woven pattern of Sugan and a decorative carved wood back that serves as the rest. This type of woven pattern is really beautiful, but it's also functional. So as an individual sits down, the wooden tendons pass through the legs and they're wedged across to tighten in the joint, strengthening the chair through the weight of the individual using it. Two other things are also of importance when looking at our chair: the ladder back style of the headrest, which looks like a ladder, and the buttery paint that covers the wood. The ladder back style is the most popular form of backing for a Sugan chair, so this is indicative of a Sugan chair that would be present in most Irish households. And because furniture such as the chairs I'm discussing were typically made from pieces of discarded timber, paint created a more unified and aesthetically clean look, which was really important for visits from priests or other important figures like Diana noted earlier. However, as Diana also mentioned earlier, painted wood is also really rare to find. So as the production of these chairs began to decline in recent history, many antique shops that came into possession of the original furniture would strip the paint, leaving the raw wood exposed. So the McMullen's chair is truly a perfect specimen of a Sugan chair native to a majority of Irish homes. The second chair that you can see on your screen now is called a Hedge Chair, which can also be called a famine chair, a fool's chair, or a Gibson chair. So this type of chair gained popularity following the Great Famine in Ireland, which was about 1845 to 1852. The great poverty in the country at the time resulted in furniture that could be made quickly and with mere scraps of wood, often found on location by the tenant farmers. So similar to the Sugan chair that you just saw, this hedge chair was really important in recycling timber previously used for other purposes. Today, only 10% of Ireland is tree covered. And of that 10%, only 1% of that coverage is filled with trees native to Ireland. This began in the early 18th century with rapid deforestation occurring as a result of the Industrial Revolution. And so island dwellers in coastal regions without trees, gathering driftwood, wreck timber, and other discarded bits was integral not only to heating one's house on a really cheap budget, but also collecting resources to build durable and sustainable furniture in times of economic recession. So to wrap up, it's really clear to see that these two chairs, the Sugan chair on the left of the slide and the Hedge chair on the right of the slide, are tangible evidence of not only daily life after the Great Famine, but also reminders of familial ties, ways in which rural families showed reverence for important visitors like priests, and a way to honor new generations coming into the world. And so that situates us perfectly in the world of daily functional decorative arts, which our next presenter is going to discuss a little more deeply. So I'll pass it off to another one of our wonderful student ambassadors, Javeria, for her part of the presentation.
So hi, my name is Javeria and I'm a studio art major. And today I'm going to be talking about the crafting objects that the Irish used. So one of the most fascinating things about the livelihood, like during that time, was the fact that there actually wasn't an abundance of resources for the people to use in their homes. So a lot of their craft materials was found in nature, and through the extensive process of becoming familiar with the materials that they used, they were able to like really flourish with simple things such as like a piece of wood. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about would be the spinning wheel. Sorry, the slide. Oh, thank you. So cloth in Ireland was spun from wool and flax, and it was one of the like most abundant forms of making cloth. And it has several names. So one of them is the long wheel, and it's also referred to as the big wheel, Mary spinning wheel, the wood wheel, or the walking wheel. And the spinner of the wheel would either sit down or they could stand up as they were doing it, and they would turn the wheel vigorously with one hand and step away to kind of like get another piece of wool and like continue doing that. And this process would join like one bundle of wool, which is referred to as like a rollage, or I might not be pronouncing that right, but they would combine those to the next. And the wheel was the key player. It was a key player in the textile industry because it was growing during that time. And the most common spinners were women and children. So I'm going to be talking about the baskets. So Joe Hogan, which is a traditional basket maker, he created contemporary baskets, and they were heavily inspired by nature and the beauty of the sweeping landscape of Ireland. And he would harvest sap and dry the willow for about a year, and it would start constructing during this time. And so mainly there was a creel and a skib. And so a creel was a basket that was traditionally used to carry fish or peat. Um, there were different types of creels, such as hay, straw, and also the straw ropes. And the skibs were a traditional basket from the West Island, and they used it to strain potatoes, and oftentimes they would turn it upside down and like just use it to eat. Yeah, so yeah, they would turn it upside down and use it to eat with. And so they were both weaved with willow, which was beneficial because one, it protected the actual like land during that time because it was used to like clean the weeds from competition. And along with that, it was also just abundant, so they could use it for crafting and making like various things such as baskets. And so they were constructed by boring holes in the wood and then lashing wood with water. And also they would make these hen coops with plaited straw. And these hen coops were made to, well, one, protect the hens because they would get stolen outside or they would just die. So it was for that reason. And another reason was that they were able to like carry the hens in these. And so it was a good material because it allowed the chickens to either like peck and scratch without tearing. And it was pretty interesting because without the actual knowledge or like teachings about these materials, they were able to just like go out and find them and use these resources to create things that they wouldn't otherwise have in their homes. Yes. I will pass this on to Chris.
Okay, hello. Welcome. I want to echo what Peyton said earlier. Thank you all for coming into the collection this evening. I did the numbers. I've worked at the McMullen for 3 years. This is my 6th and final Into the Collection presentation, which is a nice little milestone for me personally. So I'm going to be speaking about Delftware. If I could get the next slide, please. So I want to say at the outset, my presentation falls beyond the purview of Irish rural interiors. The Delftware that we are talking about, exquisite and beautiful as these pieces are, was well beyond the price range of most Irish families and absolutely more expensive than any country farmer or artisan whose homes we have seen could afford. The homes which boasted these great works looked a lot more like the house on the left, Portum the Castle, than the house on the right, which is from Diana's presentation a little earlier. The spongeware that Diana was showing earlier and speaking about was much more likely to be found in these rural cottages, perhaps complemented by 1 or 2 Delftware pieces if the family was well off, and these pieces might have been coveted as heirlooms and treasures. The difference is in the details. Spongeware and Delftware are thrown in a similar manner, but spongeware has stencils and intricate designs printed and applied to the piece, almost like a temporary tattoo, right? If you've been to a birthday party where those little tattoos can be applied to your body with ink, that's closer to the process by which spongeware was created. Whereas Delftware designs were drawn with a free hand. And so, of course, whenever we discuss our Delftware collection, it's important to note the woman who made it all possible, Elizabeth Cabot, who donated her own collection to the museum in 1997. So if I could get the next slide. So Delftware is many things. To some, it's controversial, embodying European cultural appropriation and imperial exploitation of Asian societies and artistic creation. To others, it's a symbol of trade and the value of cultural exchange. To others still, Delftware embodies the domestication and mass production of art that is celebrated by some and reviled by others. It can be an obsession for those who collect Delftware tiles, or a relic of a party handed down through centuries, in the case of Delft punch bowls that traveled with their owners to colonize America. Perhaps it is shocking that the name of this unique earthenware, Delftware, is actually a misnomer. Delftware, known throughout Europe and the Western world as such, is actually faience, and it was not first developed in Delft. It's telling that the two are so commonly associated that one might confuse the city with a physical element of the piece's composition. Delftware is a great phase of ceramic history. The piece's main aim was to imitate and replace Chinese porcelain at a much lower cost and higher availability, making the ceramic open to new audiences. Delftware was part of Europe's first early modern interactions with Imperial China, and it represented massive strides in white people's cultural embrace of the East. It is important to specify exactly what Delftware is and what it is not. Firstly, Delftware is not porcelain. Porcelain is from the Jiangxi province of China, when designers and creators discovered the properties of kaolin, a white clay that was highly heat resistant, and when fired and glazed, produced startlingly white wares of great beauty. Porcelain and its manufacturing process has evolved over hundreds of years, and the process of spreading it before trade with Europe was arduous. Because the manufacturing process took so long, because the materials used to make it are considerably rare, and because porcelain models and glazes it has been regarded as the most prestigious form of pottery. Porcelain is defined by its delicacy, its strength, and its stark white color. Delftware existed in a time before kaolin clay was discovered in Europe and represents a forerunner and an imitation of the Chinese and Japanese porcelain. Delftware also revealed its darker gray and blue color beneath its white glaze when chipped, marked, or burnt. Porcelain maintains its whiteness through and through. No surface damage or marking can change its character. So Delftware is also chemically and artistically different from other varieties of European stoneware and earthenware, like redware, Bottgerware, or Crouchware, and the later development of Jasperware. Delftware is unique because it was made through a mixed clay composition, and it had great potential for multicolor enamel and detailing. Many other stonewares and earthenware encourage a limited palette of glazes and center the color and form of the clay. But Delftware encourages prodigious decoration. Only porcelain can do better. Delftware is a specific type of pottery that has tin glaze, and that makes it unique. And so in many ways, Delftware and how it came to the Netherlands and then England and then Ireland, that story is intertwined with rich political, religious, and cultural histories of Europe. The style and composition of Delftware has remained relatively constant over the centuries, but it's important to describe the properties of this unique ceramic and how it's made. Delft faience is relatively light. In fact, it's one of the lightest European ceramics, and it is notably close to porcelain. Unlike porcelain, which featured exclusively kaolin, Delftware featured a mixture of clays. A black, fatty clay from the Rhineland known as, I'm not good at pronouncing this word, Rindlash. That's the best I can probably do. Diana, feel free to correct me. Composed the majority of the body. And when combined with marl, a pale yellow-bodied clay from Tournai in Flanders, alongside another local clay from around Delft itself, it yielded this beautiful pottery. This composite mixture was essential to the creation of a suitable body that was both throwable, it could be manipulated on the wheel, and it was still producing a worthy appearance and wasn't brittle. So Delftware was manufactured in great quantities in dozens of kilns spread around Britain and Ireland after the ware's initial success in the Netherlands. And they had to use different clay. Rindlash and marl were not necessarily available in Britain and Ireland. Carrick Fergus clay, a bluish-white, heavy, fatty clay found primarily on the western coast of Ireland, was the main ingredient for Irish and British potters, mixed with local red clays derived from elsewhere around the Irish Sea to form a composite mixture in the same manner as Dutch Delftware. Carrick Fergus was actually the best of both worlds, better than any clay that any other crafter could use. It was a lighter clay in terms of pigment that still had a really high mineral content, particularly of calcium carbonate, which we know as chalk, right? What we write with on the chalkboards. When fired, the chalk bleached the iron content of the clay to a straw or pale white color, thus neutralizing any undesirable color effects. And it also greatly increased the porosity and the permeability of the clay by creating a honeycomb structure. The mixture required less ingredients and was easier to make than Dutch Delftware. Carrick Fergus is to Liverpool, London, and Dublin kilns what Rindlash is to the Dutch kilns that follow almost identical manufacturing processes. And it is that unique element that makes the whole process possible. I want to note here the couple of Delftware pieces that I have in the presentation. We don't actually know if they're Irish or English or Dutch. It's very hard to figure that out once the piece has been fired. But you know, I'm showing these because all Delftware has some elements in common, right? So a blue glaze was usually used to achieve the look that imitates porcelain. This glaze was derived from a compound called cobalt oxide. Cobalt oxide is created via high temperature firing and then combined with a slip to produce the glaze. Shades of blue were different depending on where the cobalt ore derived from and how the firing process was managed. There are several methods of fixing decorations to Delftware periods that all evolved over time. The most common was to paint on the Delftware using the glaze and slip and then fire the piece again. So it's also, again, important to note here, there's so many different factors, right? Different clays that were used to make pieces. The color could change based off where you got your cobalt ore. That's part of the reason why so many artists who've made Delftware remain anonymous. It's part of the reason why it's so hard to date Delftware pieces or even to locate them on a map. All these different elements are changing depending on where the piece is fired and then glazed and then fired again. All of that can change. So let's talk about what we're talking about, these pieces in front of us. The decorations we see on this exquisite charger plate are a real manifestation of the orientalizing tone of so many Delftware pieces. This is porcelain imitation at its very finest. In the center scene, a man pushes a river barge underneath a fruiting tree with vegetation and beautifully rendered rock faces in the surroundings. This scene was likely lifted directly off of a model porcelain vessel or a particularly good Delftware product from elsewhere in Europe. Note also the fascinating, intricate pattern as the eye travels around the dish on the rim. This pattern is reminiscent of Ottoman ceramics, the geometric patterns that entrance and attract your eye that would adorn the vessels of the Turkish Empire. This piece, frankly, and a lot of Delftware pieces show the confluence of influences and cultural influences and trade networks. So an artist could very easily produce a scene in the center of a dish that represents a product from China, and then they could take the rim space and do something similar to this piece, creating a very intricate rim that imitates pottery from the Middle East. Because all of these products came to Europe, it was a place of real melding and new creations. So if I could get the next slide. This second work, this vase from the 18th century, is my personal favorite in the collection. And again, it shows the influence of the East on these Delftware works, quite possibly from Ireland. Vegetal motifs adorn the lip of this vase. You can see fronds and leaves there. But the true star of the show is the lotus flower sitting in a tranquil pond, surrounded by this spiral patterning. Notice the way that the lotus themselves sit within petal-shaped windows that form an additional, larger lotus flower. We can almost imagine that the lip of the vase that rises out of this shape forms the stamen, right? The center of the lotus. It's a really genius move by the glazer, the artisan who made this piece. It's almost like a double entendre. Next slide, please. This next soup plate also shows another hallmark of Eastern imitation Delftware. One flower predominates the decoration here, the mighty peony, another of my favorites. Peonies come from East Asia originally, and they're a favorite of Chinese and Japanese porcelain masters. The decoration here is no less beautiful, even if it is a reproduction. We also see in the center of the vase a pine sprig emerging from a vase. You can see the little darkened vase with the flower and then the pine sprig that makes that triangle shape. Pine is another favorite, represented often in Eastern pieces from Xinjiang and elsewhere. Next slide, please. So the final two platters that I'm going to show more original decoration, a little less Eastern influence, which was common especially in the latter half of the 18th century as European Delftware came into its own. Note the scroll and sprig border decoration on this serving platter, just on the inside of the rim. Much more reminiscent of classical column capitals and vegetal decoration than Eastern production, as well as the simple violets and daisies that adorn the second plate on the next slide. Here we go. Yep, so you can see the violets, the little three-petaled flowers, and the daisies right next to them that adorn this second plate, surrounded by a traced line of blue glaze. The acanthus vase in the center of the piece is particularly interesting, as well as the beautifully rendered bird swooping in. Delftware is an essential phase of ceramic production that facilitated massive cross-cultural exchange between Europe and Asia in new and unexpected ways. By the time of the 19th century, it was not uncommon to see Chinese and Japanese potters adopting Dutch methods of creating and artistic motifs in their porcelain, as is evidenced by later wares from the 19th and even 20th centuries. Delftware represents one of the first times in the early modern era the commodification and domestication of art, even if only for the wealthy. These Delftware pieces that we've seen today represent a further extension of the medium of ceramics, a blend of imitation and originality into Ireland, transcending the artistic imaginary of the time and connecting Irish interiors of these big houses to a large network of trade and cultural influence. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to all of you. This was a fabulous presentation, and I appreciate all the effort that you've put into this. I'd love to open it up to our guests in case they have any questions. You're welcome to either unmute yourself and ask directly or put them in the chat box.
Hi, this is Claire Dunsford. This was incredibly interesting. Really loved it. Thank you so much. One of the reasons that I decided to listen tonight was that I have a platter, maybe it's Delftware, a blue and white platter brought over from Ireland by my ancestors. And it's always been in the family for the Sunday roast, I was told. My own mother never used it, but when my parents died, it was one of the things I said, I want that platter. And do you know if I can put a picture in the chat?
Yes, or you can send it to me at some point if you don't want to take up the time now. I'm happy to address it and respond to you personally if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in the back, it does say some kind of stoneware. But
No, I'm
it's really huge, and it's exactly like the kind of thing in those dressers.
Oh, wow, I'd love to see it.
Well, I will send you a photo of the front and the back of it.
That would be great. Seeing the back is always helpful too. And
Yes.
maybe the dimension, if you could give me the diameter
Yes,
of it,
sure.
that would be
sure.
helpful. And I imagine that my email is somewhere on the website.
Oh, yeah, I'll find it, Diana.
Oh,
Thank
I
you.
also just put it in the chat box in case.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
for
Okay.
convenience.
Well, right before this, I did airdrop the pictures onto the laptop I'm watching it on. So, but I just don't know if I can put them in the chat, or I can try while other people talk.
Great.
Anyway, thank you. This was great.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to tell you so quickly, what it is, but we can certainly take a look.
Thank you.
Diana.
Yes.
It's Nancy Powell Daly.
Hi, Nancy.
The girl who sent you thank you for your note. So I grew up in Pennsylvania in farm country with a bench table that remind me a little bit of that. And it came from one of the either Powell or the White family farm. And I remember when I was a little kid, we had a bench, but then the top pulled over on it, and a little plug was put in. And that's when my brother and I did our homework when we were really, really little. And I don't know if that was the same, if Ireland had any of those or not, but it was a really heavy piece, let me tell you, heavy.
Very heavy. No, I think I mentioned actually in my talk that
Did
the
you?
settle could be converted sometimes into a settle table or a
Okay.
settle bed.
Right,
I said it
okay.
in one sentence, but it was probably pretty quick. In fact, I even saw a settle table for sale in a Massachusetts dealer's shop when I was looking.
Mm,
But we didn't really want a settle table for the collection. And anyway, it was stripped, so I didn't want to
Yeah.
strip. But it's a fascinating convertible piece of furniture that would have,
is.
been so useful for these small rooms that wouldn't have had a lot of space. So you'd
Mhm.
fold it up in the day and then it would be useful, in another function. So that's cool.
Well, it worked out okay. In the family house I grew up in was a tenant house for a farm right by Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And so it was built, the house was built in 1750. So I had real deep windowsills and everything.
Oh.
It was quite something to grow up in. It. The rooms were all very small. There was no hall upstairs at all. But so that would fit perfectly in the house then. But after my brother died and I had to clean out the house, it took 3 years. But anyway, an antique dealer was very interested in buying the bench table. Even though my mother had it refinished, it's still, it's cut down. So he took that with great glee.
They're very, very, very hard to find.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
Especially, I mean, I found one settle bed in the whole United States, and it was in a private collection and stripped, of course. So, yeah, that's really
Wow.
cool, Nancy. Thank you.
It is, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. So I also have a question here asking Diana if you found any issues with woodworm or other wood decay and searching for dressers and settle beds in Ireland.
Well, I of course, when I showed the photograph of the one dealer in Galway, just outside of Galway, was this absolutely huge warehouse, and I think I showed the dressers that were very, very old. Let's see, keep going. I'll tell you, Peyton, keep going forward. Don't go too fast. There, back one. There. So that was an enormous warehouse, and these dressers were in such terrible shape. Now, whether there were worms or certainly areas that might have been rotted, they were not, they just come right out of cabins. So I will be sure that's a big concern, and certainly importing these things across the ocean to the museum collection, we were a little concerned about, what kind of critters or what might come along with these things. And our dresser, interestingly enough, came, obviously we checked everything out and there wasn't any rot or any sign of creatures. But when I opened the cupboard, the lower cupboard of the dresser, you wouldn't even believe the smell that came out of there. It was absolutely a little scary, very smelly. So, these things came right out of these homes. But I think that we didn't come across any of that in the museum's collection. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, thank you. We also just have a comment here from Judy that says that this was a terrific series of presentations that was extremely informative and beautifully illustrated and so well orchestrated, and that it's lovely to have a peek behind the scenes of your inspiring work, bringing to life Irish decorative arts. So many thanks to all of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank
I would
you,
like to
Pete.
thank the students too, because you all did just a marvelous job with material that, it takes a long time to become familiar with. So it's not instantly easy to know what to say about it. So thank you for everybody who did a lot of good work on this.
Chris could have a great voice. He could be a good narrator for television presentations. I heard your voice. I thought TV right away, like Samuel West, the Brit does on.
Got a future there, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's the second time that somebody has said that to me in the
Really?
past week.
Oh,
A good radio
see,
voice
you
too.
have a career somewhere else.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I learned a lot about Duff, which I didn't know because I lived in Europe for a year when I taught for the army in Germany. And I always thought Duff was made in Delft in Holland. So thank you.
Yeah, it was very good.
Well, I believe that wraps up our evening. So again, I want to thank our presenters and to thank everyone for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at another Into the Collection soon. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.